Welcome to Vidicry. Here we discuss the dark chapters of history. Today we will look at white slavery in the Ottoman Empire, often overshadowed by other aspects of the empire's grandeur, yet it remains an integral part of its historical narrative. The Ottoman Empire, at its height, was one of the most powerful and expansive realms, stretching across Europe, Asia, and Africa. While many think of the empire's military prowess and architectural achievements, the dark underbelly of the Ottoman economy relied heavily on the trade of human beings, particularly white slaves from Europe. This practice was not just limited to servitude, it encompassed a wide range of roles, including labor, sexual slavery, and military service. The Ottoman slave trade emerged as a system that incorporated people from across its territories and beyond. Unlike in Western European colonies, where African slaves were primarily used, the Ottomans had a diverse pool of slaves, including Slaves, Circassians, Georgians, and even Italians and Spaniards captured during naval raids. White slavery had become an established part of life by the 16th century, when the empire began expanding deeper into Europe and capturing new territories. One of the main avenues through which white slaves entered the Ottoman Empire was through warfare. As the empire expanded into the Balkans and Eastern Europe, its armies captured Christian prisoners of war. These captives, often young boys and women, were transported back to Istanbul and other Ottoman cities where they were sold in slave markets. Unlike African slaves in the Americas, white slaves were frequently regarded as more valuable, particularly for their roles in military service and for their perceived beauty, which made them desirable in the harems of Ottoman elites. The demand for these slaves was so high that entire operations were set up to procure them. Some were captured by force in military campaigns, while others were sold into slavery by desperate families who could not afford to keep them. In terms of sexual slavery, women, particularly those of Circassian and Georgian origin, were highly prized for their beauty. They were often trained and groomed from a young age to serve as concubines in the harems of Ottoman rulers and noblemen. These harems, far from being just a group of women living together, were intricate systems of power and influence. A woman who bore a son to a sultan could rise to a position of significant political power, influencing the empire's decisions behind the scenes. Some of the most powerful women in Ottoman history were former slaves who had risen through the ranks within the harem. This aspect of slavery was not just about sexual exploitation, but about manipulation and control within the upper echelons of Ottoman society. Military service was another important aspect of white slavery in the Ottoman Empire. The infamous Janissaries, an elite corps of soldiers, were originally comprised entirely of Christian boys taken as part of the devshirme system. The devshirme, which literally means collection or gathering, was a practice whereby Christian boys, often from Balkan villages, were forcibly taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained to serve the empire. These boys, who were often between the ages of 8 and 14, were indoctrinated into the ways of the empire and raised in harsh military environments. They were cut off from their past lives, given new identities, and molded into loyal servants of the Sultan. The devshirme system was both a tool of oppression and a means of social mobility, as some boys ascended to powerful positions within the empire. A number of these janissaries rose to prominent roles in the government, even becoming viziers, the highest political office beneath the Sultan. In this sense, white slavery in the Ottoman Empire was complex, as it could result in immense personal power, albeit after severe trauma and indoctrination. Beyond sexual exploitation and military service, white slaves also filled a wide range of other roles in Ottoman society. Many were domestic servants, working in the homes of the wealthy. They cooked, cleaned, and took care of their master's children, all while being subjected to strict control. Other slaves were put to work on agricultural estates or in craft industries, contributing to the Ottoman economy in various ways. The slave markets themselves were a brutal reminder of the commodification of human lives. Located in major cities like Istanbul, These markets were bustling centers of commerce, where slaves were paraded before buyers who would examine their physical attributes before making a purchase. Young women and children fetched particularly high prices, as they were seen as more adaptable to domestic or harem life. The trading of human beings was a highly profitable business, and both Muslim and non-Muslim traders were involved in the practice. The relationship between slave and master in the Ottoman Empire was governed by both legal and religious frameworks. Islam, the dominant religion of the empire, had its own complex relationship with slavery. While Islamic law permitted slavery, it also prescribed certain rights for slaves, including the right to humane treatment and the possibility of manumission or freedom. Slaves could, in theory, purchase their own freedom if they were able to save enough money, or if their masters chose to free them as an act of piety. However, in practice, these rights were often disregarded, and many slaves spent their entire lives in servitude. The Ottoman slave system, while brutal, was also fluid in some ways. Unlike the rigid racial hierarchies seen in the transatlantic slave trade, slaves in the Ottoman Empire could sometimes attain positions of power. Some of the most trusted advisors to the sultans were former slaves who had proven their loyalty and competence. This created a paradoxical situation where slavery, while dehumanizing, could also serve as a pathway to upward social mobility for a select few. The demand for white slaves in the Ottoman Empire was driven by a number of factors, including the empire's military needs and the cultural importance of harems. However, the supply of slaves was not infinite, and as the empire's borders shifted, so too did the availability of new captives. Over time, the supply of white slaves diminished as European nations strengthened their defenses against Ottoman raids, and as the empire's territorial expansion slowed. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the tide of global opinion was beginning to turn against slavery, and the Ottoman Empire was increasingly pressured by European powers to end the practice. The British, in particular, were instrumental in pushing the Ottomans to sign anti-slavery agreements. While the Ottomans officially outlawed slavery in the late 19th century, the practice continued in some areas well into the early 20th century, particularly in more remote regions of the empire. The legacy of white slavery in the Ottoman Empire is complex. It was a system that was deeply embedded in the economic, military, and social structures of the empire. Yet it also offered certain individuals a path to power and influence that would have been unimaginable in other slave systems. The trauma and suffering endured by countless slaves, however, cannot be overlooked. Many were torn from their homes and families, forced to adopt new identities, and subjected to lives of exploitation and abuse. For every slave who rose to power, there were countless others who lived and died in obscurity, their stories lost to history. From the slave markets to the harems, from the janissaries to domestic servants, slaves played an integral role in the functioning of the empire. While the system allowed for some upward mobility, it was ultimately built on the suffering and exploitation of thousands of individuals. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more such videos. Check out the left video to explore more.